Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to part 10 of the Project Manager. I've got a brand new email notifications. We've got a total of 6 different triggers that can trigger email notifications. We've got them automatically set up so that one of them is completed on. So as soon as we click a completed on, you're going to see emails that get created automatically. And they've got a ton of variables. So we're going to show you how to do that all in a single macro. I can't wait to get started. So let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me today. As I had mentioned, we've got a brand new notifications email. We're going to take all these notifications. In fact, we've got 6 different types of triggers that can trigger these email notifications. And once the emails are sent out, they're going to be sent to an email log so we can track when and where they were sent and to who they were sent. So we've got a lot to show you. In fact, I've got 6, like I said, 6 different triggers. We've got product status change. We're going to show you how. We've got new project added. So when we add a new project, that'll trigger an email. We have the ability to have an email sent when a project gets completed or when a new task gets added. Of course, when a task gets completed, we can also send. And of course, we can, once a resource is added to a project, we can also have an email sent based on that. We can turn on or off any type of email notification simply by making it inactive or active here. We also have the ability, we've got a host over 20 different variables that we can include inside the email, both the subject and the email message. So there's a great deal of detail that we can add to that so that when we focus on those emails, we can then create a very dynamic email content based on the project, based on the task, or any details within those. So it's going to be a great training. I've got so much to show you. We're going to show you how we did this screen, how we're able to select on it, how we're able to edit the content here automatically and have that content changed and saved automatically. We'll show you that through data mapping. We're going to show you how these triggers individually, like if we add a specific resource to a project, we can trigger an email automatically. For example, that email will be focused based on the resource email, whatever email has been assigned to that resource. And we can also have a BCC if we've got an admin, we can have that. We've got the ability to customize the subject, and we can put any type of up to 20 different variables inside that subject. And of course, the body, the text message here of the email, we can also put tons of variables in here, such as project start date. So we've got a lot to cover on that. It's going to be a large training. This is going to be the final project manager. So I wanted to go out with a bang and give you tons of great value and content and give you some ideas on how you can customize this project manager to meet your exact needs. There's a lot more that can be done. Of course, it's a free download, so make sure you grab the links in the detail down below in the description. We've got tons of links for you. Also, some great links. We've got 100 workbooks for you for just $37. So be sure to pick that up if you like these videos, and it will help us keep this content free each and every week. Every Tuesday, I'm coming to you. Of course, if you have not, or you're subscribed, or you're new and you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below, and of course hit that notifications bell. That'll alert you when we bring new videos to you each and every week. So we've got a lot. We've kind of been covering this. I think next up we'll start a new series or maybe some individual videos. We've got a lot to cover. All right, let's get started. So what we did here, again, like we're going to focus on 6 different triggers, and let's go into the body of this particular email notification sheet and see how we did that. We've got basically what I've stored here, and I've given you the ability to add more, of course, more triggers if you want. Simply by selecting, it's going to load whatever's up here. So how did we do that? Basically, what I want the user to do is I want to do a few things. When a user selects a line, I want to highlight that line. We've gone over this before. We'll go over it quickly. How do we highlight? Using conditional formatting. And of course, how do we load that data up in here? And you'll see these helper cells. Of course, this, of course, would be hidden in yours if you're going to use that. You won't need that. So generally, you'll just hide it. But I'm going to, of course, we're going to show you that. That's data mapping. And I'll go over that one time again as well. I've been over it a few times before, but I want to make sure you get it. And so basically with data mapping is what I want to do is I want to assign this column, the status, to a particular value here. So for example, H3 would be active. H3 here is based on the status So that's considered H3. So everything in this column would be attributed to the trigger E3. E3 is where our trigger is located, although we really can't change the trigger, but it's loaded up there. So we've got that. So we know where to load it. We know where to put this. We know to put this always in E3. We know to put the email description in E4. This is the description of what is going to be sent. For example, for a new task added, we said email will be sent when any new project, actually it should be any new task. So let's save that. Actually, we can save it right here. When any new task is created, let's update that task. It's just a little description so you can see that. So when we save it in the table, it's going to automatically save up here. Because I'm not sure if I have the white areas, of course, if we make changes to any white cells, that's automatically saved. So keep that in mind. We can also add different email tos. Right now we've got it to the resource email. We can also BCC to the admin email. And I've added a brand new admin email in the setup screen right here. So we've got a new field. You can put your admin email right here. And then of course, any email that you put there will go automatically to the admin. So maybe you have a boss or you would like the admin to get a copy of each email, and you have that ability with admin email. So we can add that. Any email you put in here is going to go to that. All right, so we've got this email log that's going to keep track of that. So we've got the BCC. In this case, I've put admin email. You can leave it blank, or you can add, you can just put an email address in here, of course. But if it's a dynamic, just shows you a few different ways to do it. I've got all of these variables, I'm going to show you a special trick on how to, with just a few lines of code, how to replace all these variables with the actual data. So I've got a trick to show you that, something brand new. Because when we have a lot like this, we're going to use the replace in VBA, but it's something that would be a lot of VBA code. So I'm going to show you a trick to get around that. All of those variables. So we have the variables here. We've got the resource email. Now the resource email is of course located in our project resources right. Let's take here. Right here it's basically tied. So every single resource or employee or contact would have an email associated with them. And I've just put some sample data here, some emails there so that we know how we're associated with. And of course, those could be the resources that would be assigned to this. Or sometimes they're the resources that are assigned to specific tasks. So if we've got a brand new task and we want to send it. So let's say we have a new task and we want to send that test new task. We want to send that to a specific contact. So we can do, let's say, Charlie Brown. And what I did is I did not have it said, what is it? I want to send this task, but I want to make sure this task is sent when all the details are in. So we enter all the details first, and I set this trigger on the estimated days. So as soon as we enter the estimated days, that's the trigger. That gives the user the ability to enter all of these task details without sending the email until they actually put it in the day. So as soon as you enter the days, an email gets created, and now we can have the skill type, the task type we can have here. We can have the task notes, the completion percentage, and all those things, and it's automatically sent to the email associated with that particular resource. So that gets automatically done. And we've got a ton of variables you can add in for your tasks. So we have that. So keep that in mind. I've done that on estimated days, because if, for example, as soon as the user enters a new task name, we don't want to send an email because we don't know, first of all, who it's assigned to. We don't know the start date. We don't know all this information that's important. So the last thing generally is going to be the estimated days of that task. So I've used that as the trigger to send it out. So we've got that ability to send it on tasks. So that's going to be a really great ability. So back into this email notifications, let's go over briefly how we did this. The first thing, as you can see, is something is happening. When I select something, it happens. So basically, I've used a selection change in the VBA selection change. If the user selects any cell from D17 all the way to L25, I want something to happen. Now let's take a look at just exactly what is happening when we do that. And we can go into the Developers tab. Here into the Developers, we'll click on Visual Basic. Alt F11 will get you there. So Alt F11 will also get you the shortcut. And we're going to be focused on the notifications email. This is a new sheet called Sheet 9. Right, and there's just a little bit of code here. It doesn't require much code. Remember, we're focused on worksheet selection change. That is something that happens when the user makes a selection, not necessarily a change to a cell, but simply selecting a cell. And we're going to ask Excel, okay, Excel, if the user makes a selection between D17 and K25, this is the range we're focused on, then do something. Well, what do we want to do? Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to place the row, whatever row they've selected, I want to place that in B3. And the next thing I want to do is I want to run a macro, email load. So we're going to run that macro and we're going to place, why are we placing the target row in B3? Well, for a few different reasons. The first reason is I want conditional formatting. I want to highlight this row. I want this row to be dark green with a light font. So whatever row we select, and that's going to be based on B3. So if we slide over here, we see a lot of information. B3 here is located on the row. So as we select it, you will see that that specific number changes based on the selection. So we know how the B3 gets there, but how do we get that highlighted row? When we go into the home, we go into conditional formatting and we manage the rules, we can see, let's go ahead and select on this worksheet so we can see it. Now we see one, we see actually two rules. We see one that says B3 equals the row. And what do we want to do? We want to highlight. We want to edit the rule and we're going to click format and I'm going to see just what we've done. I've taken some fill effects and I've created the dark green with just a little bit of a lighter turquoise, I guess. And then I've also changed the font. Font would be bold and white. I've given it a color white. So what that's going to do is for any time B3 equals the row, that's going to highlight that row within that range. And within that range, and what is that range? Well, that range is D17 through J25. D17 through J25. So that is going to allow us to highlight the entire row. The next step, all I've done is just colored odd and even rows based on that. And what I've done is I've colored the even rows here, which is with this rule, mod of row 2 equals 0. So that means even rows. And even rows, I just want to give them a little bit of a darker fill. I don't want the basic. So when we click on more colors, we see it's a little bit of a darker than the background color. The background color would be this, so it's a little bit darker. And that gives us this look of alternating row colors here in the table. Simply, if you were going to create a table, it gives you that alternating. But we have a little bit more customization options here, a little more choice on the colors and some nice effects here. So that's the conditional formatting. And you'll see, so now we have something, another macro, which was called load the email, right? We have email load, I should say, email load. And that is what actually, that macro is what's going to take all the information in this row and bring it up here into the data information. We're going to use data mapping for that. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to run a loop. And that loop is going to be call equals column from 4 all the way to 12. So from 4 to 12, I want to run from 4 to 12. And for everything in row, let's say row 20 here, I want to take that information, whatever's in row 20, why 20? Because 20 is located in B3. Whatever's in 20, whatever's in column 4, bring it up into H3. Whatever is in column 5, bring it up into E3. Whatever is in column 6, bring it into A4. Actually, it's 4 to 10. 10 is the last one. This is a merge cell, so 4 to 10. We're going to be running that loop from 4 to 10. So let's take a look at that. Into the VBA we go, and here we've got a macro called email load. So it's very simple. We just have to dimension a few different variables, both the row and the column. As I said, we're going to loop through those columns 4 to 10. And of course, we need the row. So both of those are going to be long. And first of all, we need to make 100% sure that there actually is a value in B3. That's going to be our row number that we just talked about. If that is empty, we're going to exit the sub because we can't load any row that we don't have. Next up, I want B2 to be true. What means that is I want to mark it as loading. When we make changes, when we make a change, for example, when I make a change to this, I want that type of change to save below, right? I want that type of change to save below, and then I want to be able to load that change. That change, I want to stay in there when we use it. But what about the type of change when we click and we load? This type of change, I don't want to change. I don't want to have that saved below. Otherwise, we create a loop, an endless loop. So we don't want that. So we need to differentiate between the type of change where it's this type of change or this type of change. So we can do that using a helper cell, and we use that called email load. So when the email is loading, it's false. And what that's going to do is going to help us differentiate between those two types of changes, and that's very important. One change where the user actually makes a change, just as I did there. The other change is when the user selects it. So I need to differentiate between those two changes. And to do that, I'm going to set this B2 to true, but just temporarily, just while it's loading. And so as soon as it's finished loading, I'm going to set it back to false. So that is why we change B2 to true. All right, so once that's true, and of course, once we're done, we change it back to false. So all we really need to do to get all that data loaded is just these 4 lines of code. The first thing we want to do is the email row. We're going to define that into B3, so that's important now that we know there's a value. And of course, we're going to run a loop, 4 to 10, right? 4 to 10 is our loop. And all we're going to do, again, is we're going to get the range. What is this range? The range is located in row 16 in the email column. Let's go over that again. The row 16, we're focused on this. Remember, I need to get this. I need to get H3, then I need to get E3, E4. So I need to get this range. So this range is always going to be in row 16, and it's going to be whatever column 4, column 5, 6, and so on. So to get that, we're just going to run that little loop from 4 to 10. And then that's going to load us up. So for each time, we're going to get that range, and we're going to take whatever's in here and we're going to put it in there. So this is our range right here. So the range, whatever this value is equal to, right? So this right here is H4, E10, whatever it is. And then whatever that, it's going to say the value of that range is equal to what? Equal to the email row, that's from B3, of course, and the email column. This is the loop. This is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this loops. So this loop, all it does is basically take our data from whatever's in this row and put it up into the fields below. And it does with just a few lines of code because we've used this data mapping, because we're using this data mapping. So it's really, really helpful for us so that we can do that very easily with just a little bit of code. All right, so now we know how we get that loaded up. So now we're good. Now we know how we get it loaded up, and just that's it. So we reset B2, and then we end with the with sheet. So that's all we have to do. It's very, very simple. Simple just to load those emails. So there was a bunch of, there was a little bit of code actually as well. So now I want to go over some code that allows us to save those changes. When we make a change here, I want that change to be saved, and I want it to be saved here. You see here, it's in here. I want that test to be saved here. So how do we do that? How will we make a change to this cell? How do we save it in the table below? Well, we can use that, but we use a different type of mapping. And if you remember correctly, these columns were from 4 to 10, right? 4 to 10. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So if I know the column, for example, if I know email 2, right? If I know that email 2 is in column 7, I must know that. If I know that active status, of course, is in column 4 here, so I need to know those columns, right? If I know the column number, and I always know the row because the row is going to be here. It's always going to be in B3. If I know the column and I know the row, I can put it. So as soon as I make this back to inactive, I want it to change right here. What do I need? I need just 2 values to make that change. I need to know the row. The row is here. But I also need to know the column. I need to know that it's column 4. Where do I find column 4? That's another way of called data mapping. And I put that exactly over here. 4. And why did I put it exactly here? Well, if you see this is column 28. Okay, so that's column 28, but what column is this right here? This is column 8, right? So if this is column 8 and the other is column 28, that means all I need to do is check whatever column we're in, look for the value that's exactly 20 columns over. Look for the value that's 20 columns over. Make sure it's a number. If it's a number, then we know exactly what column to put it in. So we know the column. So I've done that for each of our variables. And the user is really only changing 4 or 5 different, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different values to be able to save in the table. The trigger doesn't really change because those are coded in by the programmer, so that wouldn't really change. So really, there's really only 5 end user ways that they can change. So I put each one 4. So we have, of course, the trigger would be 5, but we're not saving that. 7, 8, 9, and 10. So that's really it. That's all we need to save, because the trigger and the description wouldn't change. I mean, we could get the description to change, but I don't see why. The description just tells you about it. So that's something that would be done by the programmer. But the end user would really want to just change 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 different fields. So I've mapped those fields based on the columns, exactly 20 columns to the right. 10. So that's where we pull the columns. So in order to save this information, I need those two values. I need to know the row. We always have that in B3. And I need to know the column. When we know the column, we know the row. So now I can put it in its exact correct space. So as soon as we make a change to here, it gets saved in the appropriate cell down in the table below. All right, now that you have the idea, let's go through the programming, see exactly how in the programming that is done. So back into the developers, and of course these are on-sheet changes. So this would be the on-sheet changes. In other words, making changes actually on the sheet itself. So that is why we're going to be focused on the VBA within the sheet as well. And of course, we're making worksheet changes, not selection change anymore. We're actually making changes. So when the user makes a change, I want to know something. I want to do something. So what type of cells? Well, if the user makes a change to any of these cells, H3, H5, H6, and B2 must be false. In other words, here we go with the false. Why is this false? Because this is the type of change that I want to focus on, not this type of change. So if for some reason this is true, why is this true? This is true when we load it. Look, it goes to true. You see that? So that type of change, I want to ignore any changes in here. Only when it's false. When it's false, like it is now, then I want to accept those changes, those types of changes, to make these inactive. Let's make them all back to active again so that we can actually make sure that we get the emails triggered. Let's click on this and make sure they're all active so that we can actually create those emails. And let's go ahead and add in the admin email, which is the variable here. Admin. Okay. All right. So now we've got those saved back the way it was. So now you can understand the difference between those two different changes. That's why we want to make sure that B2 is false. If those two conditions, if the user's made a change to one of these cells and B2 is false, then do something. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to dimension, of course, as I mentioned, we need two variables. We need the row and we need the column. We need to know where to save that. We need the row and the column. Those two are critical. As long as we have those, we know where to save it. The email row, of course, as we discussed, is in B3, so that's important. The email column, of course, that's exactly 20 columns over to the right, right? So it's the same row, but it's 20 columns over. So it's the current column, whatever the current column is, plus 20 columns over. That is where we are going to find that column, 4, 5, 7, 9. That is where we're going to find it. So it's this target column. That's where we are going to find it. We know the column now because it's 20 columns over. So that's how we do it. It's in the same row and 20 columns over. Now that we have the email row, now that we have the email column, it's quite simple. Cells, why do we use cells? Not range. We use cells when we have a column variable, a column that's a number. When a column's a number, we're going to use cells. And so then we can say the email row and the email column, this is the range here. And what does it equal? It equals whatever the target value, whatever the user has changed. Whatever they've changed, we're going to then place in this row and this column. So that's all we need to save any changes in the data, in the cells above or the fields above to the table below. All right, so that's how we do that. All right, so we got that covered. That's basically all of the on-sheet functionality that we have here. All right, so that's how we load the tables. That's how we highlight them. So we've covered that, and that's how we change those. So it's relatively simple. We've been over things like that before. But let's get into these variables. We've got a ton of variables. I think we've got actually 24 of them, 24 different variables that we can put in either the subject or the email. So how do we get all of that information into those emails? Well, we do it. What we're going to do is I'm going to take all those variables and I'm going to place them right here. Those same exact variables, I'm going to place them right here. And then what I want to do is I want to take the actual values and I want to place them right here. Then within the VBA code, I'm going to run a loop. I'm going to run a loop all the way from 8 to 31. And whenever I find this in the email, I'm going to replace it with this and then I'm going to go to the next one. Whenever I find residential name either in the subject or the message, I'm going to replace it with this. So it's a really great way to quickly replace information, especially when you have a lot. We've got 24 different variables. So when you have a lot of variables, use a system like this. It's quick, it's very accurate, it's very easy to code, and we'll show you how to do that. But of course, the hard part is we got to make sure our formulas are clear so that we get the accurate data. And especially in this one, because we've got a few different things going on. For example, we've got project information here. We can pull the project information. We've got task information, so that's important. And we also have resource information here. We can have multiple resources. In fact, I've put one variable, which might be helpful. When we have a new project, let's go ahead and add a brand new project, test project. And we'll give it a project type here, a site update, and we'll put in a start date of 10, and then let's just give it a duration of 1 week. So now we have enough for, and let's assign some technicians resources to it. So we have 3 of them here, and let's save the project. And now you'll see that we're going to get emails, 3 different emails that are located here, and we have the ability to send all 3 out. Each one of them are going to be sent out. So we didn't specify a description on this one, but if it did, it would be displayed. So we have that. We also have the ability to add in all of the resources within the email body as well. Let's take a look at that so we can see that. Back into the notifications email, and let's take a look at new project. Here we have project description, but what if I want to add all of the resources, like I want to know the entire team, all the resources applied to a project? We could put in something like this. If we want to enter, Alt Enter will get us a new line within the same cell, Alt Enter, and we can enter assigned resources, and then we can enter colon, and then Alt Enter once again. And then what we can do is we put in this. We can put in project resource list, this one right here. Project resource list. And I'm going to show you how that's done. Okay, so now we've got the project resource list into the new project added. So now if we add a brand new project here, let's add a new project. Move it over a little bit here, and test 2 or 3, it's fine. Project type, just give it a quick project type, and then of course we do want a start date, and we'll put in this one for 1 week as well. So now when we save that, and let's put in a test description. Okay, so now let's add, of course, some additional resources to it so we can see what we would have when we have a list of people on that, and we save that project. Now when we run the email, we have a list of assigned resources on each email. So we see that now all those assigned resources are here within the email. So that's a great feature that we can have, because I want to put all of the resources, as many as there are, right in here. So, and of course now we have a description here. All right, so we see how these emails get created, and we now see what the list of resources will look like. But let's go over how we get all the formulas that we use to get all of this data on, all of this data. In fact, let's start out with this one, the residential email. Of course, that is going to be based on the resource name. And why is this in a different color? Because this is the only one that's not a formula. This particular resource can come from a few different ways. So I'm putting this in through VBA. Why is that? Well, if we create a brand new resource and we add a resource to a job, let's say Peter Rabbit, and we have a different there's a new email that's created based on this. In other words, that's a trigger. We have a new resource added here, this one, resource added. So that's a trigger as well. So when we add a resource, we can trigger an email as well. So in this case, we have a different email, but only the resource. So what I've done is said, whatever resource we just put in, I want to put it right here. And what that's going to do is allow us, with a formula, to pull the email address. And what is that email address? It's a simple formula. We're going to use if error in case there's an issue. We're going to index all the resource emails. And of course, the resources emails are just in the resources here. These are just the names, so we can see that. Those are the resources. Let's escape out of that. Okay, so now we have, what we're going to do is we have the list, but now we need to find the row. Well, what is the row? We're going to use match for that. What are we matching? We're matching whatever's B19. So we're looking up the name and we're going to find the associated email. And then, of course, we're going to look up that name and we are going to look it up through the resource names. Those are just named ranges that we've created. And we want an exact match, so it's going to be 0. And we want it based on the first column, because we have already a named range for the resource emails right here. So all I need to do is locate the row and then pull that information. And that's going to pull the email address right up. All right, the admin email is simply a direct link from the admin email. That's a named range that I created based on the setup screen field. So when we here in the setup, we'll see in this N4, it's been given a named range called admin email. So that's easy, so we know the admin email. All right. So moving on back into the notifications email, we also have the project name. And what's the project name is located in E4. Project name, project manager E4 is where our project name. So E4, that's our project name. So that's just a simple link to the original cell where it's going to be located. Likewise, we have again, same thing with project type, same thing with project description, and all of this information now, and same thing for project status. So this type of information is just direct link from the project manager. See, direct links right into here. Now, what about the project resource list? This is a little bit more tricky because what I want to do is I want all of the name right here. I want all of them, but I only want those. Now, I tried it with concatenate, but concatenate would actually leave blanks here. So I don't want the blanks. So then we're going to use an if. So I could also use concatenate and combine all of these, which is fine, and then just add it. But we're going to use if statements, so that basically we're going to say if there's a value here, add it. If there's a value here, add it. If there's a value, I'm going to create one long text string. But in between those, let's see if I can pull up that email. I don't have that email. In between those email, I want a new line. In other words, I don't want them to be all in the same line. I want them to each on a new line. So all we need to do is add character 10. Character 10 is the ASCII character for the enter, the new line. So how do we do that? Let's take a look at this formula. All we're going to be doing is just using if. For the first thing we're going to do is we want Project Manager H6. That's the first resource in our project manager right here, H6. But now I'm not sure if there's going to be values in 7, 8, or 9. So we're going to run if statements, but we're just going to use and let me show you how that works. So back into, because I want to list all of the resources. I want to list all the resources. So the first thing is the first one we're going to list. Then we're going to use an and, right? Because we want to combine if the project manager H7 does not equal empty. If it's not empty, then we're going to add what? We're going to add a brand new line, character 10, and we're going to add whatever values in project manager. Otherwise, we're going to leave it blank. So there's going to be, then we're going to do the same exact thing for H8. If it does not equal blank, then add a new line and then add whatever values in H8, and then otherwise blank. And so we're going to keep doing that if statement throughout all the ones. It's a little bit longer, but it's really simple. It's just it's just 6 different if statements. And then we're adding for each new value, we're adding a new symbol. So what that's going to do is going to allow us to create a different. So if we open this up, we can see that we actually have 4 different resources all on new lines. And that's the way I want it to appear in the email itself. So that helps us bring all those together. So it's going to be the same thing here. So that allows us to bring it, because I want to list them all just like that in the email. So that was kind of important. So I wanted to bring that to your attention as well. All right, moving on. The project start on date. Again, that's a direct link back to E8 in the project manager. E8 is the start on date, so that's just a direct link right there. So if that changes, of course, you're going to see the value change in the email here. The duration is a combination of 2 fields, 1 weeks in this case, or if we change it. So if we change it to 2 weeks, it's a direct link. That is a direct link. It's the combination of cells H14 and cells I14, and we're just bringing those 2 together. So that's kind of a nice feature, so that we can bring those 2 together. And so when we see that, we can do that with just the project manager and H14, and we're going to add a space in between those, and the number I and the I14, the cell I14. So that brings those two together and just combines those. We could use concatenate as well, but that's very simple. All right, the project end date. Again, the project end date, what we want to do is index that. I want to index that because project end date is a calculated feature, right? Calculated because it's calculated based on the start date and based on the duration, and of course based on holidays and based on weekly schedule on or off. So the end date is located in the project list here. Project list here, end date, and it's calculated based on a formula, right? So for the end date, what I need to do is I need to pull the project number, and then I need to determine the end date based on that through a formula. So how do we do that? Well, if we take a look, we're going to index the project end date. That's that column I just showed you. And we're going to simply use the project manager B4 through 3.1. We know B4 minus 3. Why can we do that for the row? Remember, we're indexing. We need to locate the row. What is the row? Well, we know the row, of course, the project manager. If we look here in, let's unhide these. If we look here in B4, we know the project row is 25. The project row in this project list is 25. So when we pull it down here and we look at 25, we know that is the project. So what I need to do is I need to pull this end date. But we know it's row 25, but if we're indexing the end days right here, remember we're indexing, this would be 1, right? Not the row number, right? So this would be 1. If we're indexing and we want the first project, this would be 1. So we need to make a subtraction because we want the first one. So we're going to subtract 3. So when we look at that and we see back into the end date, we need to subtract 3 from the row number because we're indexing it, and the indexing starts on row 4. So we need to subtract 3. So it's whatever's in B4 minus 3, and of course it's just the column, this column 1, we're going to focus on column, that's going to get us our project end date, and that'll pull it up from that table. And we're pulling it up from the table because it's a calculated amount. And if there's a completed on date, let's pull up a project where we have some information that's completed into the month view, and we can hide the tasks. Let's go ahead and see if okay, this one's got some completed on information, so we can pull that up back into the notice. So we have a completion on 7/6. Of course, this is manager E12. And task name, these values are going to be using when we have work, when we're sending out a specific email on a specific task. On a task, then those are going to get auto-filled in. Let's take a look at that into the project manager, and we're going to show the tasks. And let me go ahead and hide these so we have a little more screen room here. We can show them if we need to in a bit. Okay, so we have project tasks. Now we have any email notification when a task gets complete. Let's put some information in here so we have some information so that, okay, so now this we want to show, I want to send an email based on this task being complete. So let's put it at 6:17, and now it's been completed. So we've got this task has been completed by Fred Fretters, and so this is basically information concerning that task, and it'll send the email out based on that. Now, if we take a look back into the notification emails, we'll see that all of the information is now entered based on this information. So we have all of the task index. Because why is that? Well, because it's going to index the task name, and we now have, let's put back into project, it's all based on, I gotta unhide these columns again because we're going to show you. It's all based on the selected task row here. So as soon as now there's no row, right? So now there's no row, nothing's going to show up here. But as soon as we select a task and we have a task row, once I have the task row, I can then get all of this task information or whatever there is available all into here because it's all based on the selected task. Why can we do that? Well, you see task row is 8, right? We know the task row. We went over that last time, but what does that do? That allows us to pull the information from the table, and I want to pull this information all the way, and I want to bring that information into this task information. But the important thing is I must know the task row. I must know where the original data is located. So we've got to know that. So without that row, we don't have any ability. So we do need to have that row. But of course, as soon as a user selects a specific task, so as soon as we have that, we're able to fill in all the detail. So let's start out the task name. We're going to index the task name. That is a named range. If you want to just take a quick look at that, let's take a look in the formulas, name manager. And let's go down to task name right here, and we'll tab over that. And you can see that it's a dynamic named range on our project task. And of course, it just covers that. So we're going to pull this up. So I've got the name. All I need to do is figure out, I've got the column. All I need to do is figure out what row it's on. And that's what we can use the index for. So back into our notifications, back in. So we're going to index the task name. Now we're going to use indirect, right? I need to know that row. What is the row? It's in the project manager Q8. Q8 is where our actual row is. In fact, let me just show you that. I know it's a little bit confusing. This will tell us the task row. So we know it's 10, but this is the task. This is the database task row. So Q, right? This holds the database row. Sorry, I was confused there. So this will tell us the task row. The task is row 10. So what is in Q10? What is in Q12? 12 is a task row. These are the database rows, 19, 20, 23, 32, 33. Those are the rows of all of the data information. Those are the rows. So the project task, these are the rows, 19, 22, 23. So those are the rows. That's where the original data is. That's a little bit more clear. So what I need to do is I need to get, if I'm going to get all that task information, I need to know what row. We know the row is here in Q. So Q contains our database row number. Q what? Q what? Q8 or Q10, right? So all I need to do is get Q10, Q8, and that'll pull this value up. That's going to pull this. Once I have row 32, I can pull all the information up. For example, 32, I can pull all of the task information right away. I can pull it up because I know what row. So the critical thing is to get that 32. So we can do that in our formulas. Let's load a task. In our project manager, let's load a task like this one. So in this case, let's hide that 32. 32 is what I'm looking for. And to get that is Q10. Q10 is where located. Q is the column, 10 is the row. Q10 is where it's located. So that's what I need to get to. All right, let's go back into here and see test one. So we know that project manager Q, we know that's the column, but what is the row? The row is where project manager 8, BA, remember the row is located. So what is this value? What is this value? We're going to use indirect for that. That's going to tell us the value. In this case, it's 32, right? 32. So the indirect 32 is going to tell us the value, which is 32. But we're going to subtract 2. Why are we subtracting 2? Because we're indexing task names, and task names do not start on row 1. In fact, they start on row 3. So we need to subtract 2. So all of this is going to get us probably 30, right? So we're going to index the task name. 30th row down, the 30th row is going to get us our individual names. So what is that? Let's go through that. So here's our task names. Go through our tasks, project tasks. So we're starting here, and we're going to go 30 down, and we're going, once we get to 30, we're going to find it. It's right here. This is our 30th row right here. That is our 30th row in test 1. So that's how we can pull up test 1. 30 rows down from the top of the index. We'll pull test 1, and that's how we can get test 1 right in here. And we're going to use the same idea, except we're going to just index different. For example, the task resource, we're going to index task resource. We're going to use the same row, everything else is the same, except we're indexing something different. In this case, we're indexing the task resource. And so we're going to do the same thing for task type. We're going to do the same thing for task notes. We're going to do the same thing for start on date, the same exact thing. And of course, the task estimated days as well as the task actual days. So all of those use the same thing, including the task status, the task completion, completed on, and of course, the estimated costs are actually directly into the project. These are based on the project, so we can pull these right from the project. Except these I wanted to give a little bit of a format, so I've given these a different format. If you have a currency different than dollar, change it right here. And this is going to do is give us a comma when it's 3 digits over, and I've removed any decimal positions so that there's no decimal. Of course, if you wanted to add it on a decimal, you could just add it right here and it would show you the decimal. So it's really simple to change this kind of format. formatting. And this is going to allow us to control the format. And why do we do that? Now, we can control, of course, if we do like 560 here, we can control the format through this, but I don't want a cell format. You understand? I don't want a cell format. I want actually a test, because in this case, I want to focus, because I want that format. I want that $sign to come directly in the email. If we use something like this, the format will be missing because the value is just 560. So we're not focused on cell format here. We're focused on the actual format of the value, because we want that currency symbol and perhaps the commas or the decimals, we want those brought into the email. And so that is why we use text here. And text is going to help us add that information so that when it's brought into the email, automatically it is then displayed in that email with the currency symbols or what have you. All right, so that's why we use text to add that information on, as opposed to using a cell format. All right, great. So now you see how we get all those variables, but now how do we get that into the email? Well, let's go over focus on the actual macro that creates it, and then we're going to go into the triggers. Let's take a look back into the Visual Basic, and we're going to go back into our email macros right here. And I have just one macro. Just one macro is going to run for every single one of those triggers. Even though those triggers are all different, we have one macro to do it all. And how do we do that? Well, the first thing I want to do is when we have a trigger, I want to make sure I know what row. Right? Is it triggered? This is row 17, this is row 18, and this is row 19. I've got to know what row. So with the send email row is here, right? Send email. This changes. This row changes based on what email is being sent out. For example, the last email that I sent out was right here, was the task complete. If I send another email out, a different type, then it's going to change. So let's take a look at that, and let's add a resource onto this, and we'll add a resource, and an email is going to get generated for that. And so now we have the email that's generated based on that, and that is for adding a resources. And I believe that's the last one. That's resource added, and that would be in 22. So you see now the email row is 22. If I know what row, I know all the details. I know all of the individual details. I know it's based on this, but I've got to know what row. Is it 22? Is it 21? So what I do is on the trigger, I assign this row to B5 first. That's the first thing I do. Let me show you how that works. Back into the developers in Visual Basic. Now let's say we're assigning a resource. We're going to go into the project manager because we're making some changes in the project manager. And we're actually making a change, so it's going to be on change, right? So what kind of change are we talking about? It's this kind of change on resource change. We're changing our resources, but not on new project or project load. Okay, that's good. We're making a change to H6 to H12. Now we had that before, but now we're going to add just a little bit. We added, let's clear this out a little bit. Okay, so here we have some brand new lines of code, and all we're going to be doing is saying B5 equals 22. Remember, that's very important. That's manually set. That lets us know what trigger. So that means if the user makes a change to H6 and a few conditions, and of course B2 equals false, that means it's not loading. That means the project's not loading. That kind of change we don't want. And B3 is false. That means it's going to be an existing. I went over that, but that means this is not a new project, not a new project. So for an existing project, when we add a resource, I want an email to go out. So those conditions are met. And of course, we have to make sure that J and the target row, that keeps track of our row. This is where our resource name is, right? So we want to make sure it's not empty. We actually have to enter a name. So we need to be sure, because if we delete, let's say we delete a resources, that kind of change, we don't want to send an email. We only want to send an email when there's a value in H. So then it's a new resources. And so we're going to set the project row. We already did that. This is when we add the information to sheet 4, which of course is the project resource. So that's separate. But this is brand new. This is going to say send new resource notification if active. Well, I checked that it's active in the email. In the email, I'll show you how we check it's active, but we're not going to do that yet. So the first thing we need to do is set sheet 9. Of course, that is our notification email, B5 to 22. Let me show you that again. Sheet 9, this is sheet 9, B5 must be 22. So we change this value. This is going to tell us what email we're sending. We've got 6 emails, 6 different emails. I need to know which one to send. Well, putting 22 in here tells us exactly that. Now we know what email we're sending. All right, the next thing we're going to do in that macro is we're going to set B9 to H in the target row. What does that do? That adds the assigned resource's name. Remember, we're doing that manually because we don't know where the resources came from. We don't know if it came from this. For example, if we add a brand new task, the resource is going to come from here. If we add a brand new resource, so H and whatever the target row, we're going to take that value, whatever's here, and I'm going to put it right here in B9. And what that does, remember, this allows us to generate automatically this particular email address based on the index and match. So we need to manually put in this resource in. So as soon as we have that, we can generate everything else. So this is important. We want to put that in manually. All right, so the next step is simply to run the macro. So we've got the information, we know the row, we know the resource who we're going to send it to, perhaps, and now we need to run the macro called email, create, and send. That's it. That's all we need to do. But let's go over this macro. So now you understand how we get this specific email, how we know what specific email, and how we set the specific resources, and now we can run through the macro. So we can go back into the email, and I'm going to focus on this macro right now. We want the email to S string, we want the BCC string, subject message, those are all strings, those are all part of the email. And of course, we need to create an Outlook application through late binding, so we're going to define only as an object here. In this case, only an object. That allows us to not have reference libraries for Outlook, right? We don't have an Outlook reference library, so we have it, we're just not assigning it, we're not using it right now. So in that case, we can do late binding because I don't want you to require to assign the Outlook library. So if you don't need to, so we can do it through late binding, which means defining these as objects and then later on defining them as specific email Outlook application or something like that. So for example, in this case, we are going to set them all the way down here. We can define them here, set the Outlook to create Outlook application and then the mail. So this is late binding. We're binding this Outlook application to this Outlook late, not early. Early would be here in the dimension. Okay, so moving on, we need to know the email row. I need to know, remember, that's in this case it's 22, but we need to know the row. That's very important, right? We need to know the last resource row. If we're going to be running through all the resources, let's say we're going to send it out to all of the resources. Let's say it's a brand new project and I need to send it out to all these. I need to know what the last row is. In this case, it's 7, but if there's a lot of resources, we need to know what the last row is. So that's very, very important. And then, of course, we need to know the resource row, whatever resource we're on. If we're looping through the resource starting at 6, let's say there's 4 different resources, we need to loop through all of them. Of course, we need to define the resource. And of course, the first resource row, we need to define that as well, and I'll show you why. The variable row, I need to loop through all of the variables. The variables are going to be what? The variables are going to be all of these things. So we're going to start at row 8 and go all the way to 31. So I need to loop through those as well. So we need to define that. So that's really important. And of course, the email log row, we need to create an email log. I want to know what emails were sent, and I want to know when they were sent. So I need to know the email log row. I need to know the next available log row. In this case, it would be 26. So we need to keep track of that. So that's important. So we need to know all those. So it gives you an idea of where we are headed in this macro. Okay, with sheet 9, that is our email notification email sheet. That's what we're going to be focusing on, so we can focus. If B5 equals empty, if there's an exit missing, send email row, that's critical. We need to know that email row. If it's missing, we can exit out of the sub. Email row is B5. We're going to define that email row. That's important because we need to know what to send to. We need to know all that information. If D in the email row does not equal active, then exit the sub. That means this email is not active. If it's, then we can exit out. For example, if D right here and the email row is not active, then exit out, right? We only want to focus. So for example, if we make this inactive, there's no way that this email is going to be sent. So we need to make sure to give the user the ability to send some and make some inactive. So based on that, we can make activate or inactivate those. All right, so we're going to keep them active for now. So that's what we're going to do. So D, remember, we've already defined the email rows B. So in this case, if D22 is not active, then exit out of the sub. Okay, moving on. Now we need to send to one or all the resources based on the email type. For example, because there's two different types. Let's say I have a project here. Let's hide these again. Hopefully we won't need to unhide them. Let's hide them. Okay, so let's say I am creating a brand new resource. I only wanted to send it to one person. I want to create an email and I only want to send it to Peter Rabbit. That's it, just him. So for this type of email, I'm only sending it to one. But what if I create a new project? If I create a brand new project, I want to send it to all of the resources. So based on the type of trigger, I may send it to more than one. So for example, if I have a specific project and I've chosen two different resources, I want to send it to both of those resources. So for this type of trigger, I want to send it to both of them. So when I create that, when I save it, I want to send it to Sally and David. So we're going to be creating two different emails, one to David and one to Sally. So for this type, so I need to know what type of trigger, right? Remember, we're using the same macro for both of these, so we need to know sometimes we're going to send it to just one, or sometimes we're going to send it to all of them. So that's why we need to define what it is. For example, if it's a resource added, this type of trigger, resource added, we're only sending it to one resource, the one that was added. However, a new project added, if it's new project added, or if it's completed project, or if it's product status change, I wanted to send this, all three of these types of triggers, all three, I wanted to send it to every single resource that has been assigned to that project. Project status change, new product, or completed. So all of those, that would be row 8, 17, 18, or 19, that goes to all of the resources. So if it's going to go to all the resources, how do we do that? Well, I need to start at this row 6 and go all the way down and send it and create a loop for each one of those. In this case, it would be from 6 to 7. So create an email for each one of those. But that is only, remember, that is only for emails that are either 17, row 17, 18, or 19. So we do that within the code. So we can say, if the email row is less than 20, 17, 18, or 19, then of course we're going to send it to all the resources. Then we can set the last resource row. It's of course going to be H13, which is the last possible row, and up. So this is going to get us our last row from H13 all the way up. So in this case, of course, it is 7. 7's our last row with a value. If we add another one, of course, it's going to be 8. So depending upon that last row, it's going to determine the loop. In this case, it'll go from 6 to 8. All right, so we understand why we're going to loop it. So for example, if the last row is less than 6, that would indicate that there are no resources, there are no resource added, then the last row equals 6. In this case, we probably wouldn't be sending out any emails to any resources, but this just avoids an error. If it's less than 6, that would mean there are no resources on that project. So it's going to set the minimum row to 6. And then of course the first row is going to be 6. The first row is going to be 6. We have to loop through that, right? First row is 6. That's the first possible resource. The last one in this case would be 8. So in this case, we're going to run from 6 to 8. So moving back into the code, else, what do you mean else? Else means it's something other than 20, right? In that case, we're only sending it out to one resource. So in that case, I need to send the last resource row and the first resource both to 1. Why do we do that? Because I'm going to run a loop no matter what. So if I'm running a loop no matter what, but I'm only sending it to one person, I need to make sure that that loop goes from 1 to 1, right? So it only runs once. This loop will be used for either, so this loop will either be from, in this case, 6 to 8, but if it's a different type of email, right, if we're just sending out to one person, all this loop is going to go from 1 to 1, which means it just runs once. So that really enables us to loop, but it's only going to loop once, so it's not really a loop, but we can use that for both types of scenarios, or every type of scenario, actually. All 6 types of scenarios can do that. So I've placed them. So if it's less than 20, if it's 17, 18, or 19, it's going to create a loop through all the resources. If it's any one of the other three triggers, it's just going to run once. All right, if the last resource one does not equal 1, then B9 is the resource name. What does that mean? If the last resource, if it does not equal, then then B9 equals last. So what I'm saying here is this. If it's not 1, right, that means we're running through this loop, right? I need to take this value and I need to put it right here. I need to put it right here. I need to take that resource. Why do I need to put it here? I need to put it in B9 because I need to generate the email address so that I can send it to them. So we need to take, so each time, the first time we're going to take whatever's here, whatever's here, whatever's here, and we're going to place that right into B9. That's going to help us generate the email address. There's a few different ways we can generate, but I'm using this template no matter what. This way you can use the name and the email even in the body. You can use it anywhere you want, so it's really nice. All of our variables are always located in here, so it's very handy. Okay, so now we know why we must place this name, and we need to loop through it. So that's the first thing we do within our loop, is we place the name inside that to generate the email address. So that generates the email address. Next, we're going to calculate it. Why do I want to run the calculation? Because I want to make sure that that email address is based on a calculation, based on a formula. So I want to make sure that that does get calculated automatically, because it could be that we've turned off calculations. So ensuring that we calculate sheet 9 ensures that all of those formulas get calculated. So that's really important. All right, next up, we are ready to define. Now we're going to put the subject. Of course, that's going to be in I in the email row. We need to know the email row. Subject, message, email to, BCC. Those are all here. So we have the subject is in I. Of course, the message is in K. The email to is in G. So we're gonna actually pull all that information and put them in variables. So whether it's from the email to, the BCC, the subject, and message. So all 4 of those values get moved into string variables, and we can do that right here: subject, message, email to, BCC. Okay, next thing I want to do is the email to. I want to use the replace, and I'm going to use double replace here. Replace, that means 2 possible. If the email address contains the resident email, I want to replace it with whatever's in B8. That is our email value. Otherwise, if it contains admin, I want to replace it in B10. So we're going to replace the email to with any variables that the user may have added. And we're going to replace them either with whatever's in B8 or whatever's in B10. So that's just going to take this value here and replace it inside and replace it with the actual email. So we've done that using the replace statement. And we're going to do the same thing with the BCC. So all we're doing is replacing admin email or residential email, resource email I should say, with the actual email address. All right, next up, here is our loop to take all of those variables into our email content. Remember, we've already defined subject and message here. So what I'm going to do, again, let's go over that with you. I'm going to run our loop from 8 all the way to 32, and I'm going to look in A. If there's any value in A, I want to replace anything that looks like res email. I want to replace it with this. If there's anything that says project type, I want to replace it with this. So we can do that with just a few lines of code. So we're going to define our loop right here. And all we need to do is use the replace, and I just need to use one replace, and we're going to replace. Here's our original string here, subject. We've defined it up here, but this, of course, this here contains all of the pounds and all of our variables. I want to replace it with actual data. So what do I want to replace it with? What is the original text that I want to replace? It's A and the variable row. What do I want to replace it with? I want to replace it with whatever's B and the variable row. So I want to do that. I want to do that for both the subject and the message. And then I want to run the loop all the way from 8 to 31. That's going to replace all of the variables with our actual data. Just these few lines of code. Very simple. So we did the hard work with the formulas and putting all this information in, but once we do that in VBA is simple. Again, we're going to take a look at, so for example, if we see project start on, we know that project start on is right here. So when it finds project start on here, it's going to replace it with whatever value is in here. In this case, it's July 10th, 2019. So it's going to replace it right there. So it's pretty simple with just a few lines of code. Now we have our subject message. Now we have all the data in here. Now we're ready to create our email. Again, we're going to set the Outlook application to create an Outlook application. And of course, we're going to create an email. This actually creates the email. And then what do we want to do with it? Here it's very, very simple now. To is equal to email to, BCC to BC2, subject, all. Of course, that already has all of our data in there, and then the message, so we can put all that information in. Next thing, I just have to run a quick check. Do we want to display the email, or do we want to just send it? Well, I've added this little checkbox here, and this little checkbox here lets the user know, do we want to display them before sending? Of course, for our purposes, we want to display them. We're not actually sending emails. We don't have any real data or real people to send it to, so we're going to display those emails, and of course, we're going to delete them. But displaying it, this particular option box is actually assigned to cell link B6. So in B6, if this is true, here's B6 here. If this is true, then display the emails. If it's false, then just send the emails right away. So moving back into the code here, if sheet 9 B2, if it's true, B6 equals true, then display the emails. Otherwise, send it. So that's really, that allows us to easily allow the user to get the option to display or to send. All right, next up, I want to create the email log. I want to take all the information and I want to know what was sent, to who it was sent, and where it was sent. And I want to store all that data right here. And I also want to create a log ID. I want to create a unique log ID. So I've created a brand new named range called log ID. And if we look in the name manager, and then we look in the formulas and name manager, we can see that there's something called email log ID. And it's a dynamic named range, of course, and it's basically contained all that. And why do I want to create a name ID? Because what I want to do is I want to take the maximum value of this and I want to add 1. So the next one would be 28. And so we can use that with a formula. So back to the notifications, we see our next log ID is just that. We're going to take the maximum of the email log ID, whatever, and make sure they're numbers. Okay, I've seen a few of you have problems with this, but probably because they're not numbers. You got to make sure all these are actual numbers. Okay, if there's a text anywhere in here or they're formatted as text, it's going to create issues. So remember, we want the maximum, so they need to be numbers and not text. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the maximum of that and I'm just going to add 1 right here. Maximum, of course, we're adding 1. And now, why is there an error? If there's an error, then put 1. Why would there be an error? There would be an error if there's no data. If there's no data, you're just starting out, you clear all the data out, there's going to be an error. So in that case, just default it to 1. What that's going to do is going to default our first email log to 1 no matter what. So it's kind of a good way to automatically making sure that there's actually a number in there. And of course, our next log ID is 28 because we are already up to 27. So now all I need to do is find the first available row. We're going to go with the last row. In this case, it's 29. Add 1. Then we're going to add all the data right here. We can do that with just a few lines of code. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get the email log row. As I just stated, sheet 10 is our email log. Using A99 and XLUp. Plus 1 is going to give us our first available row. The next is just simply a matter of taking the information from our sheet. In fact, B4 is the next email log. Remember, I know B4 is where our next log ID, and we're going to put that into A. And of course, the current date and time now will give us our current date and time. We're going to put that in B. We're going to use the email to the subject message, putting those into columns C, D, and E. And next up, I want to make sure that the wrap text is false. I want to do that because it's going to expand too much because we've got a lot of text in here. If I don't wrap the text, it's just going to be really, really full and it's going to expand our rows too high. So for example, if we unwrap the text, I don't want it to look like that. So automatically through VBA, we just wrap the text and that's going to give us, at least we have just our row heights at 15 for every row. So we can see a lot of data that way without having to do that. All right, so that's in the VBA. We can wrap the text with just one line of code. Sheet 10 email log row and the colon and email log row wrap text equals false. So we don't want to wrap the text. We want it all in one line. All right, that is how we create the email. Let's go over the triggers now. We've gone over just a few triggers, but let's go over a little bit more so we can go all the triggers and see how we do that. Now back into the project manager we go. We can see that we have added on project. We saw when we save a project that we also have a trigger. So let's look into the project save. So back into the developers, course, remember correctly, we have the project macros, and one of them is called project save. And we've created a trigger. When we save a brand new project, we want an email to go out, possibly. So down here at the bottom, we're going to do just that, send email notifications to active. The first thing we want to do again is set the row. What is the row? 18 in this case. Why is it 18? Well, in this case, email notifications, you'll see on row 18, we have new project added. New project added. That's going to tell it what information. So the first thing we want to do is set 18, and we want to put that right here into B3. B3 equals 18. Then we're ready to run our macro. That's the same macro. So B3, then we can create the macro. So that's all we have to do, and that's at the end of project save. So that saves it. All right, next up, what other triggers do we have? We've got project status change. So let's take a look at that. Now, the project, when we change the status, if we change it to in process, I want an email to go out. In fact, I want an email to go out to each one of the resources. In this case, it's 3 of them. And I want to let them know that this test is now in process and inform me that the project has changed statuses and so on. And so how do we do that? Well, that's basically a change on E10. So when we made a change to E10, then I want that specific email to possibly go out. E10 is the affected cell. So let's take a look at that. Inside the project manager sheet, and we have focus on E10, that is the status. So let's take a look at that right up here. So remember, here on product change, we've already defined on project change here, and of course E10 is part of that. But when we drill down a little bit farther, we see now if we're actually on change. Let's separate that out a little bit. On change of status, possibly send email if active. So if not intersect, that means the user has made a change to E10, then do something. The first thing we want to do again is set the email notification row. 17 is the row where we have our project change, right? That is our status change on 17 in the notifications. Here, 17 is where our project status change. So we're going to set that row. Then all we have to do is run the same macro that we've done. So that's how we do that. It's very simple. Just on E10, we notice if there's a change. All right, next up, we've got new project added. We've got completed project. That's pretty simple. All we're going to be doing when we complete a project is when we make a change to E12. When we make a change here, we want something to happen. So back into our VBA code, now we're just looking for something called E12. When we make a change to E12, what happened? And here it is. On change of completed on, when not blank, mark all. And so here we have E12. We already have that in, but we've added a little bit more. On project completion here, I've added it down here because here we have E12. And down here, if B sheet 9B5, we're going to set it to 19. This is our project completion row. And then run the macro again. So all we're doing is setting the row, telling it which email to send, and then running the macro. All right, let's continue on through our triggers. We have new task added. I showed new task. Let's take a look at that. And back into the project manager, we have task changes. Now when we make a change or task added, we can add that down. On task change, here we have task change. So when we have a task change or new task, I want something to happen. What do I want to happen? Well, I want to send out an email on a new task. New task right here. And down here we see check for the first time entering number of days. Remember, I want to focus. Remember, when we enter the number of days. So how do we know that? Well, the first thing what I want to do is when I'm creating a task in the project manager, let's bring up hide this calendar, show the task, go into the month view and pull up a job with tasks. Now when we add a new task here, let's see, we're adding a new task. Right here, what I do is I want that trigger, remember, on the estimated days. I want it to trigger on that, right? So only on that. So we're going to focus on that. So when we add the days, what is that? Well, let's take a look at that into the VBA. When we add that, first thing we're going to do is we're going to check for the first time entering. If the task database column is equals 7, and why is that? The task database column equals 7. That is found down here, 7. Remember, we're pulling that information. We're defining that. 7, I know, is for the estimated days. How do we know? How do we know it? Because the task database column right here is the cells, the target row, and 54 rows down, we're going to find that 7. I need to know what column that is. Why is it 7? Why 7? Well, because 7 is the column that we're using in the task database. So when we look in the project task and we look at 7 is the estimated days. G is column 7. So that's what we're focused on. That's where we're going to place the information when it goes here. We're going to place those estimated days. And you notice there's nothing here. So if there's nothing here, that means it's brand new, right? I'm going to check. If it's empty, then we know it's a brand new task. And then we know we can put it in. So we're checking for that inside there. So if sheet 7G in the task value goes empty, that means there's no days, right? There's no estimated days in there yet. We have that we're focused on the task and there's nothing yet, then I know we can then create it's a brand new task. I know because there's no days entered, and I know we can send the email based on that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to place that information into the database. I want to place it. So it's going to be sheet 7, the task row. This is going to place the days right in here. So if we stop this code, let's take a look at that. I'm going to stop the code. I'm going to go into the project manager and I'm going to put the days in right here, 15. Okay, so now the code is set. So now it's stopped. You see the column is 7, the row is 45, and the value, it's the 15 has been placed into the database. So let's take a look at that database right now, just so we see exactly where it's at. Now it's been placed here. You see it. So now we're ready to go. Now we're ready. We're just going to calculate that. Now we're ready to take all that information, all that task information, bring it into here, bring it all into here, and send the email out. So we can continue on with our macro. Now we're going to set the email notification row to 20. We are going to set B9, or what is B9? We're going to send the assigned resource task. Where is that? Resource. Why do I want to do that? I want to take this person right here in column L. I want to take that resource and I want to put him right here into this place. So once I put him there, we can then generate the email address automatically. So we can generate that just by putting it. So I want to make sure that email is located in B9 because we're about to send him an email. So we need to generate the email address. So we need to do that. B9's got to be, and then we're ready to run the macro. So as soon as I click play on that, it's going to generate that email automatically, just like that. Okay, so that's how we send to tasks. So it's important to remember that we need to set the right row. We need to make sure that the right name is in there, L and B8. This is going to tell us what row. It's going to basically take that information. All we're doing really is taking this name, Fred Fetters, and putting it right into here. So you see here it's in B9. That way we can generate the email for Fred. All right, so we've got that trigger. We've got the new task added. We've got task completed. Let's take a look at that. Now when we complete a task, what are we doing? We're actually making a change to a specific cell again, and that of course would be right here. So when we complete it, we're making a change to M and 16. So when we make a change to that, I want something to happen. So how do we do that? Well, let's take a look on completed on change, but not on cell. So we have completed on right here, and it's right here. I've added this. If the task database column is 12, 12 is associated with it. Why 12? Again, scrolling down here, 12. This is the associated column for completed on. This is column 12 right here. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Completed on right here. So we're going to check for this. If it's 12, then we know that the user has actually put in a completed on date. And in that case, we want to possibly generate, if it's active, an email. The first thing we're going to do is set again. We're going to update the database for the calculations. I want to make sure that database contains that value. In other words, I want to make sure the first thing I want to do is I want to put that completed on right here. I want to put it right here, or whatever row we've associated with. I want to make sure that goes right there. Next thing what I want to do is I want to make sure that we have put in our 9. We got to make sure that is, I think I need to put that in, and I want to make sure I assign it. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so we've done that already. So we've assigned the resource. That's good. That's important. Sheet 9 is going to get that information. And of course, we've updated the completed on days. That's important. We need to make, and now we're ready to send the completed. So we've basically added in the email row. We know that it's the completed task. That's the email row. B9, of course, has the resource. We know that. And we've updated the database with the completed on days. I want to make sure that the completed on days is accurate because I may need those. Then we're ready to generate the email. And that way, as soon as we enter a specific date, it automatically sends that email. So as soon as we enter a completed on date right here, it's going to generate that email. And now we have it automatically started on 7/10, ended on, so we've got it automatically there for that task and automatically sends it based on that information. And the last one I've automatically told you, which is automatically adding the resources, and I've showed you that. That is the last one that takes care of it, and I've shown you that, of course, adding the resources. So that's the last one. And that's the resource added. So I've shown you all of the email notifications and how we can trigger. So let's summarize what we learned today in this extra long training today. Well, we've learned actually how to select and show data. We've learned how to automatically change information simply by changing it over and using data mapping, once again, two ways, using the cells here and the addresses here, and also using the columns here. We've also used how to run through a lot of email variables using a very simple code, just 3 lines of code to run a for next loop by replacing 24 different variables in just a few lines of code. So we learned that. We learned a lot of index and matching formulas. We've used a lot of them here. We've also used indirect here formula, so we've covered that. We have also shown you how to use an email log row and create the information along with the max formula to show a brand new independent and unique ID. So that's kind of nice. We have also shown you how to make changes automatically based on information, based on details, and of course how to create those emails with the email notifications, and of course how to display or send emails based on the setting here. So we've covered a lot. It's been a great project manager series. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know a lot of you had ideas that we didn't quite get to it, but I wanted to make sure we moved on to something else. And of course, if you want this application, it's absolutely free, as they all are. Just click the links down below. And if you do appreciate these, I've got some other. I've got the brand new 100 zip file with 100 workbooks, as well as the 1,000 resources. If you want to pick those up, they're going to be a great price. And of course, the 15-hour plus dashboard masterclass. Over hundreds and hundreds of students are doing amazing with the skills they're learning in that course. So go ahead and click the links below. I do appreciate that. Thank you so much. As always, I appreciate your likes, your shares. Comment below. I'll read every comment and I respond to every comment. So I appreciate that. Thanks so much. Have a great day.